You're listening to the winning literary show, Off the Shelf Books Talk Radio, live with host Denise Turney, author of the books Long Walk Up, Portia, Love Pour Over Me, Spiral, Love Has Many Faces, and Rosetta's Great Hope. Turn up your dial and get ready for a blast of feature author interviews, 411 on book festivals, writing conferences, and so much more. Ready? Let's go.
When you think about quitting, think about why you started. I love that quote. When you think about quitting, think about why you started. And that's whoever made the quote is anonymous. And I want to welcome, and thank you for tuning in, especially to our loyal listeners. 17 years, we're going on 18 years on the podcast, started on the radio, then podcasting. And for those of you, whether it's your first time or you've listened many, many times, I want to welcome you to our Saturday, July the 8th, 2023 show. We have a wonderful author on deck with you. I always learn so much and look forward to the interviews as I'm researching, to come up with the questions to ask the guests for the show. So exciting to learn with you from the guests that we will introduce to you in just a few moments. But first, I want to ask you, how good of a mystery sleuth are you? My brother loves Monk, and I don't think it comes on anymore, but you can still see the reruns. I love Columbo. These shows, even if they tell you, like Columbo, they'll tell you who did it. But then you watch the show to see their motives, who else could have been involved, just how it all played out. And I just love a mystery, just that element, something, can I figure out why they did it, just exactly how did it happen, who else was involved. If you're one of those people and you love a mystery, but wait, you also love relationships, whether there's a complicated father-son relationship in this story, and there are these 5 friends that meet at college, and their friendship lasts a lifetime. But one of these friends is involved in a murder, and you just have to watch it play out. And there is a true love story. Again, these 2 people meet in college. One is a track and field on his way to the Olympics. If you value relationships and you love a good mystery, I encourage you to get a copy of Love Pour Over Me. You can get it in paperback or an ebook. And if you don't see it on the store shelf, just ask the clerk to order you a copy of Love Pour Over Me by Denise Turney, and let me know how you enjoy the book. So please go treat yourself to a copy of Love Pour Over Me today. And now let us go and meet our very special off-the-shelf guest. And today's guest is Christopher Gould. Christopher is the author of The George Stories. I love that title. The George Stories and the Boys and Girls of America. When I was researching for his feature, I kept thinking Boys and Girls Club. Boys and Girls Club. Every time I heard that, my brain just hear Boys and Girls together. Boys and Girls of America. His first novel, The George Stories, was published in 2019. And it was nominated, congratulations to him, for the Central New York Book of the Year Award. Christopher graduated from Nazareth College of Rochester with a degree in writing, and he makes his home in upstate New York. Please check him out online at authorchristophergould.com. I'm going to spell it AUTHORCHRISTOPHERGOULD.com. Again, AUTHORCHRISTOPHERGOULD.com. AuthorChristopherGould.com. We are absolutely honored to have him here with us on Off the Shelf. Welcome to Off the Shelf, Christopher.
Hi, Denise. How are you?
I'm doing fabulous, and hope you are doing likewise. Thank you for being here with us this morning. The first few questions I'm going to ask you, I ask every guest that comes on the show, just to give the listeners a little backstory on the guest before I start talking to them about their books, how they got started writing, etc. So to kick it off today, Christopher, can you please tell off-the-shelf listeners where you grew up and what life was like for you growing up?
Sure. So I grew up in a small town in upstate New York called Pulaski. It's roughly 45 miles north of Syracuse, New York. That's probably the closest larger city. So I had a great childhood. It was a nice little idyllic setting to grow up in. It was the kind of place where you could ride your bike all over town and then maybe play some hoops at a friend's house or some football. And as long as you were home for dinner, all was good.
Okay, upstate, and then it's so different when people say upstate New York. There's a lot of open land. It's very different.
Sure,
than
absolutely.
Manhattan. Now, when you were a young kid, what did you want to be when you grew up?
That's a good question. So I had the grand ambition of playing in the NBA, and I would shoot hoops in my driveway by the hour. With that idea in mind. So that was one of the big things. And something else that I was heavily into at that time was I used to watch a lot of James Bond movies, so I wanted to be a spy. So those were my grand ambitions at that time. Neither panned out, obviously.
Interesting. I love to ask that question to our guests. Some actually always did, what they wanted to do, but most didn't. Most did not. Now, who or what inspired you to actually start to pursue writing? What birthed your love for books?
Yeah, I think there's a handful of writers that I just was spellbound by, whether it was J.D. Salinger or Truman Capote and tons of others, and I was very inspired by their work. I also had some very good English teachers growing up that were very inspiring, and I think that's what sort of triggered that seed, if you will.
Now, when you started, before we go more specifically into your writing and your majoring in writing in college, how old were you? You just talked about some of the writers who left an impression on you, but how old were you when you knew that you wanted to be a writer?
Oh, it didn't happen until fairly late in my life. When I say that, I was probably in my mid-20s. I was already employed as a teacher, and it wasn't until then that I got the writing bug. But I think I was sort of working up to it all my life, if you want to know the truth.
Interesting. Now, while you were pursuing your writing degree at Nazareth College, what was your focus? Was it journalism, creative writing, corporate marketing? What was your main focus when you majored in writing at Nazareth College?
Yeah, so Nazareth has a technical writing program, and so that's what the program was centered on largely. So it was kind of a distinctive writing program. There wasn't any creative writing program offered at that time at Nazareth, at least not at the undergraduate level. But I certainly got a different viewpoint in terms of creating more industrial kinds of writing, whether it was brochures or advertising and things like that. It was more from that perspective.
I'm sure we could get to that later when we start talking a little bit about later, almost near the close. I may make a note to swing back to that because I'm sure that benefits you today when you start selling your books. Now, looking back, Chris, would you advise novel writers or even nonfiction writers to pursue some level of post-secondary writing education? And if so, why?
It certainly helps. Even later in life, there's a lot of sort of these, like adult learning facilities, YMCAs that offer creative writing programs. I was a part of many of those, and I certainly picked up on a ton of good feedback and tons of good information. I also sent work out to be professionally critiqued, which wasn't cheap, but it paid some dividends for me in the long run.
You got to get that feedback. A lot of writers, I actually interviewed a young writer. I was really impressed. She's written several novels, and she started when she was very young. but she not getting a lot of feedback. She just said she's nervous about it. But you're going to get it one way or the other. It's going to come from a reader who gives you a review, a book reviewer, or an editor. I know they have software programs you can use, but it's really important if you want to continue to improve as a writer to get that feedback. Now to learning about your very first book. You went to Nazareth College, technical writing. You just love certain stories and your James Bond movies. Curious if any of your books are like any of those in any way, but please give Off the Shelf listeners an overview of the George series.
Yeah, absolutely. So the George stories is about a child prodigy named George, obviously, and he is very gifted, but he just wants to be a regular kid. His parents are sort of pushing him towards, being famous and, with all sorts of high-level activities. So in the opening chapter, George, he sabotages his own chances at success. And this one event, this inciting incident, sort of brings his whole life into complete, like a haywire kind of circumstance, and his entire family is upended by the events.
Now, why? Okay, first of all, this made me curious. What makes George Morrison? Why is he a child prodigy? What is it? And when did his parents start to notice that, he's something about him is different?
Yeah, so the book goes into that. He has an IQ that is off the charts, and he's actually known as a child for having a photographic memory. He can recite untold pages ad nauseum. And he'll go on stage and he'll recite like a famous speech or the Declaration of Independence, and with just off the top of his head, word for word. So that's initially what he was known for.
Now, when did his parents notice it, and are any of his parents or anyone in his family, does anyone had a similar gift, or is anybody else in his family like exceptionally brilliant?
Well, George has an older sister named Annabelle who is very bright, and early on, the parents think that Annabelle is sort of the brain in the family, but the family sort of stumbles upon George at a school event, and he's just reciting these books that are well above his age, and it sort of blows everyone's mind. So it's this major family event where this is kind of revealed.
Now, how old is George? And can you describe for our listeners, the characters, the more you reveal the characters, people are like, I got to read this book because I want to know more about George. How old is George, and what is his personality like? Is he outgoing, confident? Is he timid? Does he keep to himself a lot? Does he like to have fun? Is he serious? How old is he? He has an older sister. Does he have any other siblings? Can you describe George for us? Yeah,
sure. So when the story starts, George is quite young. He's roughly 8 or 9 years old. And as the story progresses, it goes up till his adult life. So in terms of his personality traits, he's a fairly serious individual. He's pretty focused, but he's also very disgruntled about not being able to do a lot of normal kid things because his parents are constantly taking him around and putting him in various talent shows, and they want to get him on TV and have him maybe on like a PBS special kind of a deal. So there's lots of that stuff going on early in the story, but he does not have an especially fun life, and like I said, things go haywire after this opening chapter event, and a lot of very, very bad things happen to him, unfortunately, as the story unfolds.
So he's 8 or 9 at the start of the story. Where does this story take place? What town and if you can tell us a little about the town and what time period. Because for some reason I'm thinking 1800s. What time period is the book set in, and what town, and what's the town like where George lives?
Yeah, sure. So it's roughly during the 1980s, and it's more of a modern, not a modern setting, but a contemporary type setting. Early 1980s, and it takes place in a fictional upstate New York town. So that's the general setting.
Okay. Now, if you could just introduce us, I want to ask you a few more questions before we start talking about the boys and girls of America. If you could introduce us to George's parents, what are they like? Are they like, they're not greedy? Sound like they're a little greedy. What are they like? Where do they work, and what drives his parents?
Yeah, so George's father sells insurance, and he's pretty aloof. Just has a sort of a distant personality. He's not heavily featured in the novel, actually. The mother is very focused and featured in the story as a whole, and she can be sort of pushing George for this level of success and to be a high achiever and all that, and he sort of rebels largely because of that.
So the father he doesn't seem like he's that active in his son's life.
Yeah.
I'm trying to see his. No, go ahead.
No. So the structure of the George stories is not a typical novel format. It is largely a series of short stories about George that span his life, if you will. So there are these time gaps from one chapter to the next. So maybe in the first chapter he's 9, and then in the next maybe he's 12, and so on. So there are these built-in time gaps, if you will. That's by design, really. But so there are various life events, if you will, that capture George, whether it's him going off to college, or whether it's him later on having a nervous breakdown, later on when he's on his honeymoon. So there are these life events that are captured in these chapters throughout.
I've never heard of a book put together like that. Had you ever read a book like that before? No, I liked it. It's
no,
different.
It's good.
It's
no,
awesome. Where did you get the idea, the concept to develop the book that way?
That's a great question. So back then I was writing short stories exclusively, and all these short stories were about George. So I was doing a lot of writer workshop type classes, and I had some really strong teachers. And one of them suggested that I put all these stories together as a book. So it took me many, many years to sort of make that all work, if you will. But I eventually put it together in book form. But I did like the idea of there being these gaps in time, especially at that time, because I was definitely more of a short story writer. And I wanted to not necessarily have to figure out every single loose end, and I could do that by using this format.
Interesting. Yeah, this is a first. 17 years doing Off the Shelf. This is a first. Very interesting. I applaud you for doing something unique and different. And then let me ask you, and I hadn't planned on asking you this, short stories versus novels. I've always been told the shorter the piece, the harder it is to write. Would you agree with that?
I would. Many years ago, I spent a year working on a novel. I was very devoted to it, and after a year I gave up because I couldn't do it. So I actually quit writing. This is many years ago, and then I eventually said, hey, I'll try writing short stories. How hard can that be? So I spent a year working on one story. And, again, years ago, and after a year, I couldn't get it right. So I actually quit writing because I couldn't do it. I couldn't complete the story. So then one day in the mail, there was this flyer from this local YMCA ad, and lo and behold, they had a creative writing class. And so I'm looking at it, and I'm thinking, maybe I'll just give it one more shot. And so I enrolled in this class, and that was really a game changer for me because a lot of my questions were answered.
Interesting. Writing is work. I've heard, when I was younger, I started writing when I was 10, but I had always heard the really, really talented writers say it is hard work. And I thought, no, it isn't. But now I would say it is work. I mean, just putting words on a paper, that's easy. But, to create a really engaging, interesting story, especially one that a lot of people find interesting, that takes a lot of work. And I think our strongest critic is ourselves. And so once you get past yourself, you're pretty much maybe on your way. Now, I have to ask you this.
Sure.
Why does George mess up his life? Why does he want to avoid in the 1980s? Man, he could have been riding that money, being a child star. He has this something about him that's so unique. He has his memory, whatever other gifts. Did he have any child star friends? And he feared what happened to them, what happened to him? What made him afraid to do it?
Yeah, I think he thought he was missing out on typical kid things, and he also felt very, very isolated from other kids. So in the opening chapter, George, on a very rare occasion, he strikes up a conversation with a young girl who was also there for the talent show, and they sort of commiserate over their level of unhappiness. And it's one of the few times George is actually able to connect with another kid. And without giving too much away from that opening story, George definitely decides to make a pretty big change in his life by sabotaging his chances at this event. Yeah. So this particular opening chapter, it's his talent show, and it's the finals, and it's on a national stage, and there's TV cameras and all of that, and he gets a chance to sort of steal the show, and he does something else entirely to mess everything up. So on many levels, so it's on many levels, it's about him wanting to be a kid, a normal kid, and on another level, he's rebelling largely against his mother, who's forcing him largely to be in these various talent shows, if you will.
Every parent, every kid that wants to make it like that should read the George stories. It doesn't mean they should do what he did, but it might give them some insight. Like they may say, you know what, this isn't, and the parent may back off. Are there any other? Maybe introduce us to two or three other minor or major characters in the George stories who help drive the whole story forward.
Yeah, so because of the format, again, it's largely a series of short stories. Some of the featured players, he's pretty involved with his mother. There are several chapters where he's with his sister. Sometimes it's good, sometimes it's bad. And then, of course, later on in life, he gets married, so there's several chapters devoted to George and his wife. So those are the central players, if you will. He does have some college buddies, but because of the format, they're only introduced basically in a small number of chapters. Two
more questions on the George stories before we move on
Sure.
to your next book. I had This one, just hearing you talk about it, when authors talk about their books, they become that much more interesting to me, and I'm sure to listeners as well. The book, the George Stories, is it based in part, or I guess at the most in part, on any real-life experiences, something you read, something you experienced? And if not, what's the inspiration behind this particular story? It just sounds so unique.
Yeah, so it is. It's largely just me creating this character out of basically nothing. I think I was inspired by the writings of author J.D. Salinger. He wrote several short stories about this particular family. It's called the Glass series. So there's one particular story called A Perfect Day for Banana Fish, and the main character is Seymour Glass, who is also a prodigy and who is not particularly happy with his life. So that was probably an inspiration for George. And I'm not sure if you're familiar with the movie The Royal Tenenbaums. It came out I would say Wes Anderson is the director. So he created this movie where you have this entire family of child geniuses, and they're all sort of messed up. So that was also part of the inspiration.
Man, you got me thinking, oh, my goodness, and just the fact that you came up with something that is not a typical novel is like you'd have to read the George Stories to get this experience, because you're not going to get it a whole lot of other places. Now, that said, what have readers been saying about the George Stories?
I've had some strong reviews. That was my first book, so there weren't a ton of reviews initially, just because I was pretty new on the scene. But the ones I do have were very strong, and that was certainly encouraging. So George is sort of a quirky book in terms of style. It's sort of a throwback to maybe like a James Thurber-ish vibe. It has this third-person outside perspective that is not really seen a ton in modern writing, but it seemed to fit the character George pretty well, and it was a style I stuck with throughout.
Now, how soon after publishing the George Stories did you sit down and write The Boys and Girls of America?
So George was published June 1st, 2019, and that's the exact date that I started writing The Boys and Girls of America. I was afraid of sort of jinxing the book being published, so I wanted to wait until I saw it on Amazon and Barnes & Noble before I started anything else. So I was kind of superstitious about it at that time anyway.
The very same day? Wow.
Yes.
Had that story... No, go ahead.
So, and actually, just by chance, The Boys and Girls of America was also published on June 1st. That's also just a coincidence, but just the way it worked out publishing-wise.
So you were superstitious, you didn't want to start writing on a new book before you saw the George Stories was indeed, in fact, published and on these retail sites. Had that story been noodling, and had it been in your mind, you've been noodling with it for a while before you started writing it?
Yeah, I had the title in my head way back when I was writing the George Stories, but I wasn't sure I'd ever get around to it. And I knew it was going to be about a bunch of Gen X kids during the 90s at a college somewhere. But I wasn't really sure. And then as it happened, I came across an article in Vanity Fair that was all about Gen X, and it was written by this writer, Rich Cohen. And I actually use a quote from that article in the beginning of the book to sort of springboard the novel into play. But that was the beginning stages of it.
Now, can you please give us an overview of The Boys and Girls of America?
Yeah, so it's it's a college novel, like I said, set in the 90s. It deals heavily with Gen Xers, and there's all sorts of cultural references. My protagonist is a visiting writer in residence at this elite school. His name is James Castle. The twist is that this particular college was James's dream school years ago, but he wasn't accepted. He was pretty heartbroken about not getting in. So he has his chance to sort of go back and see what he missed out, and he thinks it's going to be all roses. And it is in many ways, but once he arrives on campus, somebody starts to sort of blackmail him about his past. And they leave him these packages throughout the novel that expose some deep, dark family secrets, if you will.
Whoa. So this is a mystery.
It is, and that's really just sort of how the novel came into being. It was pretty spontaneous writing. Obviously, it's been through all sorts of rewrites, but that was sort of a spontaneous part of it. Now, I should say there's really three tiers to this particular story. You have these on-campus chapters, which James is obviously a part of, and he gets to know a variety of students, and there's some romance. So that's the first tier. And then you have a series of flashback chapters that shine a light on James's past. And they're sort of mingled throughout the novel. And then the third tier are what are entitled office hours chapters. And in these chapters, students come in to visit James, and they're supposed to be coming in to sort of get advice in terms of how to be a writer, how to get published. But really, it's just his friends coming in who sort of tell them about their lives, and they're from all over America, whether it's Maryland, whether it's the D.C. area, the Hollywood Hills. So the reader gets to sort of get a sense of these various Gen Xers from all these different backgrounds through the eyes of James, if you will.
Okay, so you said the three tiers. Now I'm going back to how you structured the George stories. Is it a compilation of short stories about James Castle, or is it really written more traditional novel?
That's a great question. This is written straightforward traditionally. So it's definitely more of a traditionally structured novel with all sorts of holes filled in, if you will.
Okay. Now, what type of writing was James Castle? He went to this college, and now he's coming back, and I guess he's assuming the people who knew him before are no longer there. What type of writing was he hoping to do?
So he does have one published novel. It's called Wit's End. It's sort of this literary fiction novel that it didn't necessarily sell a lot of copies, but it did sort of give him some juice, if you will, on the scene. And this particular book is what allows him to get this writer-in-residence position. And the particular book is actually filled with all these deep, dark family secrets that eventually come to light.
Okay. Now, why is he so set on attending Edson College? Why he's got this residency? He's would assume moved on with his life. Why is he going back to something from his past? Why this particular school?
Yeah, so I think it's just a question of when he initially went to visit this school, and he walked around on this campus, and it's this glorious campus with all sorts of enchanting things to see, and because of what he sees and feels, he just fell in love with the place. It also turns out there's a very famous professor who teaches on this campus, who becomes a mentor for James, and his name is Leander Beaumont. He's a big character in the novel, and he's actually the one that grants James the writer-in-residence post. Because of his presence, and he's sort of this larger-than-life character on his own. He's won all sorts of awards himself. That's the other reason why he wanted to go to this particular school, to be mentored by him.
But he doesn't get in, right? He doesn't get in?
He doesn't, yes, right. So it's years later where he gets the writer-in-residence post that he applies for after he's gotten some success with his first book.
So the first time he tries to get into this college, he wants to be mentored by this writer, if I'm getting this right. He's denied.
Yep.
He's not able.
Denied.
He's not able to go. Why?
Yeah, so then So he applies for the writer-in-residence position roughly 5 years later. He's only 23, 24, so he's not that much older than the kids that are actually in attendance. As it happens, I don't want to give too much away, but he misses his campus interview with the dean. Because he has really good grades, he had been published to some degree as a young kid, but he misses his campus interview because of family circumstances, and so he's ultimately denied entrance into this school.
And just how did young James, he's so set. Is this his first real-life disappointment? Before I ask you the next question, it's like the first time in your life when you really want something, you've worked hard for it, you feel like you deserve it, you're more than qualified, and boom, you don't get it. Is this his first real-life disappointment?
Definitely not. Definitely not.
Oh.
The flashback chapters reveal a ton of events that definitely involve some major life challenges and major disappointments. Despite all this, James is actually pretty well adjusted, unlike George. George is not well adjusted, but James is pretty well adjusted despite some pretty heavy-duty events going on in his past.
Because I was going to ask you, how devastated was he when he saw he didn't get in Edson College? How devastated?
He was
devastated?
Yes, very much so. He in the book he actually ends up at SUNY Purchase, and he has a good college experience, but he always sort of feels this massive hole, this longing to go back to Edson College, his dream school.
Yeah, it left a huge impression on him. So this is and you bring that out into the reader sees that as they read The Boys and Girls of America, that comes out.
Oh, very much so.
So is James, he wrote a novel, Wit's End, and you may have said this earlier. If you did, I apologize. Is this somewhat autobiographical? And do the events in the book he's wrote, James Castle, the main character in The Boys and Girls of America, do the events that he writes in his novel, Wit's End, do they impact his life in real life? I see movies all the time about an author who wrote a mystery, and boom, the stuff starts happening with the author didn't intend for it to. Is this autobiographical?
Oh, no, it's definitely not about me. I think I always wanted to write a college novel about being a Gen Xer. I'm a Gen Xer. I love my college years, but my particular college experience is not James. I wasn't even really considering writing at that stage in my life, but I fell in love with my college years like a lot of kids, and I was very impacted, some fantastic friendships. I met my wife in college. So I always wanted to write about that era as best as I could. I think at that time in my life, I think I felt like going off to college was probably the single most important thing a young person could do. I'm not saying that's accurate, but that was my viewpoint at that time, that there was nothing more high-minded or sophisticated, and I very much wanted to be a part of that. So I think I probably have a pretty romantic view of the college experience, and I think James does too. So James and I do have that part in common. And I think in the opening chapter where you have kids moving into this campus and it's this elite school and there's all these expectations, and you have proud parents, and there's a lot of kids who are nervous about leaving home. And James is sort of watching all these kids move in with their luggage and their suitcases. And because he's already there, and he sort of is sort of just taken up by the event. He's swept up in it as he watches it from his room.
Oh, my God, I love the way you talk about your characters, how you develop your characters, and the reader can see, really get close to your characters. But is Wits End, is that, for James, is that autobiographical? He wrote a novel.
Okay. Yeah, it is. And it reveals some deep, dark family secrets that's why he's being blackmailed, actually. And that over the course of the novel, bits and pieces are revealed to the reader about these events.
Why would he do that? Did he feel safe? Did he feel safe exposing those family secrets, or did he not know that this would come back on you?
Yeah, I think, and this comes out in the book, he sort of masquerades the events so that they're not quite as easily seen by the average reader, but certain people that know James personally in his life are able to connect the dots and expose him. So, it's that kind of situation. So, so this particular character who is blackmailing him leaves different packages, if you will, that sort of expose the true origins of his book, The Wits End, and James gets all worked up about it, and the professor, Leander Beaumont, gets involved, and he tries to sort of guide him through these circumstances. So it's a pretty involved part of the story.
Do you see this? I see a movie. When you wrote it, did it come to you as you were writing it visually, like you could see a movie playing itself out?
That would be fantastic. I certainly wouldn't turn that opportunity down. I've had some people say that who've read the book, which is always nice to hear. But obviously that's the kind of thing that is a very difficult thing to get involved in making those kinds of connections. But that'd be wonderful.
So these boys and girls come into this class. They tell their stories. It's not, James writes this novel, so there's like almost two stories in here. Is a lot of the book largely some of the retelling of these students who come into class from all different parts of America and retell their stories?
Yes.
Is a lot of
yes. So yes. So there are several chapters, and they're entitled Office Hours because James is the writer in residence on campus. One of his responsibilities is he has these office hours. So these kids come in, and again, he's supposed to be there to guide them to getting published and that kind of thing. But they end up just socializing and telling him about their family lives at home. What happened on Christmas break, what happened on spring break, what happened during Thanksgiving, and all that kind of stuff. And they're from all over the country. So it gives the reader a real sense of a wide cast of characters. One of them is sort of a criminal who has all these different schemes. Somebody else is more of an athlete. Somebody else is sort of a nerd-like character. And then, of course, there's one character who is James's on-campus romance angle, if you will.
I was going to ask you, is James, throughout the course of the Boys and Girls of America, he's single at the beginning, I'm assuming, and he's young. And does he get married later? And what is his family life like? I really am interested in knowing what's his relationship like with his parents, and like if he has siblings. Is it good? Is it not good?
Well, these are excellent questions. So it's difficult to say without spoiling certain parts of the story, but he has a pretty checkered family past that is exposed over these various flashback chapters. And the story has a definitive ending, but I can't really reveal if James ends up with anyone romance-wise. I don't want to spoil that part.
Okay. It sounds very intriguing. Who's the target audience for the Boys and Girls of America, and why did you choose to appeal to this particular audience?
Yeah, so I think I wrote it for anyone who was a member of Generation X. And along with that, I think the target audience is anyone in America who's ever gone to college. Obviously, the book is hyper-focused on 90s era pop culture because there's a lot of references to the music of the time period, whether it's indie rock or the grunge scene, and so there's lots of those types of things throughout the book. But pretty much anyone who has ever gone to college in America, and that's really the focus, or anyone who plans to go to college. As it happens, my daughter is going to be going off to college for the first time in the fall.
Oh my God!
And yeah, I've been working on this book forever, and I didn't time it that way. That's just the way it worked out. So she's reading it. She's learning a lot about her dad because there's a lot of keg party scenes and all sorts of shenanigans. But she is of course part of a different generation than me, obviously. But I think anyone can take away something from it nonetheless.
Does the book's title hold a special meaning?
It does. So there's a rock band called The Hold Steady. It's one of my favorite bands, and one of their albums is entitled The Boys and Girls in America. So it's slightly different. But it's a borrowed title. It doesn't have anything to do with that particular album other than just sharing a partial title, but that's where the title comes from, and I had that title in my head way, way, way back. But it is part of the story of the Hold Steady, the band, the Hold Steady.
What have readers been saying about the Boys and Girls of America, and have you found that most of the book's readers are from Gen X?
I've gotten some strong reviews from some publications. BookView gave me a 5-star review. Reader's Choice gave me a strong review. So it's been very positive. I don't have a lot of feedback in terms of who is buying the novel, at least not at this stage. That data hasn't been shared with me yet, but I'm hoping at some point to get some feedback in terms of what the demographics are.
Okay, interesting. Your stories, you go very deep into your characters. I can tell by the way you talk about your books. Now, speaking about that, because you seem to give your characters a lot of depth, how do you, like you said, the George stories, it just came out of nowhere. How do you connect with characters so you're able to bring them alive for readers?
Oh, that's a really good question. I think so much of what I do is spontaneous, and I think my best ideas are just me sort of making it up as I go along. Obviously, you have to go back and refine things, millions of times, really. But so I think that's part of it. And I also think once you get into the whole writing as a profession, you are sort of kind of obsessive about, this would make for a good idea, or I better write this down because I could use this somewhere. So I have endless notebooks with story ideas, even bits of dialogue that I think I want to use at some point. So I'm an endless note taker in many respects, whether it's paper notebooks or even just I have all sorts of notes on my iPhone with ideas and things I want to use at some point. So it comes from all over, really. I think nowadays, because modern writers are in a position where a lot of the best ideas have been already taken, so it's very, very difficult to come up with something novel. But I try very hard to mix things up and not depend on tropes too much. If that makes sense.
You bring up a good point. It's really almost very difficult to come up with a story that's not been told. Although the way you wrote the George stories is very unique to me. But you have to write this same story in such a different way, and it's the characters. You can't create a character in a way that it seems like someone new that's never been on the scene before. What writing process? You say you take a lot of notes. What writing process do you follow when you take the story from the concept to finished product? Do you use outlines? Do you do character sketches? How do you flesh out the story?
Well, I think with George, because it's so focused on him almost exclusively, it was a pretty straightforward telling in many ways. With Boys and Girls, because it's a monster. It's just under 500 pages. There's a wide cast of characters. So I did write that opening chapter about kids moving in. But I quickly realized I was going to have to really, really outline this to keep everything straight, even just for my own benefit. So I think it very much depends on the kind of story. In the case of Boys and Girls, because it's, again, I use this term, it's a three-tiered story with several subplots. It was necessary to really outline it as I went along. Otherwise, I wouldn't have been able to make it cohesive, if you will. So, yeah, that was definitely a part of it.
Now, can you share, just shifting gears just a little bit from the story development, characters development, can you share 3 to 4 steps, Chris, that you've taken that you personally have found to be effective at getting the word out about your books?
Yeah, so for my first book, that was all very new to me, and I think I didn't do a great job initially of promoting it. In that early stage, I wasn't really super comfortable telling people, hey, I wrote this book. That happened over a period of time where my comfort level came up. But certainly in this day and age, social media plays a huge role, and you have to be pretty active on that. And, of course, trying to make author appearances locally. And, obviously, podcasts are extremely helpful. So those are the key ways that I've been able to sort of have some level of success.
Now, you're going back to Ed when you went to college at Nazareth. You did some, like, the technical writing, and I'm not sure if you did any marketing writing at all. Have you been able to leverage any of that as you start marketing your books?
I honestly haven't, because even though I went to school to be again, this program was a technical writing program, I actually have been a public school teacher for nearly 30 years. So, which isn't really in the same venue, if you will, with the promotional aspect. So I never actually had a chance because I decided to be a public school teacher instead.
And thank you for that. My sister's a teacher. I'm like, oh my God! I buy a teacher's.
Yeah, it's been a winding path.
Oh my God! Teachers, nurses, certain people, particularly people. I have my oldest brother's a pastor who are constantly dealing with other people's issues and which never seem to run out. I really applaud you. So thank you. Now, are you working on Are you working on any new books, Chris? And if so, could you give us a glimpse into what you're working on?
Yeah, so I'm just in the very beginning stages, not even done with the first chapter, but it is going to be set up on the St. Lawrence River. I'm not sure if you're familiar with that area or not.
I know I'm not.
Yeah,
okay.
So the St. Lawrence River, it's north of even where I live. It's on the border between Canada and the U.S., and it's going to be set there. My family has a summer cottage up there. It's been in my family for many generations, so it's going to take place up there. But I can't even tell you how the story is going to go because I haven't quite gotten that far with it, really.
So you're a writer, and I am myself. They call them pantsers. The story unfolds as you're writing? Okay, it unfolds. And it works out for a lot of writers. Most writers who've come on here, that is exactly how they write. But I've heard very established writers say you got to do an outline. You got to outline. Well, it feels too constrictive to me writing that way. That shared, we learn so much about ourselves. We come down to the last few minutes of the show. We learn so much about ourselves while we're creating. What have you learned about yourself since you started writing books?
I'm very surprised at what comes out on the page because I think the particular style of my writing isn't necessarily my outward personality. I think a lot of writers, I'll use J.D. Salinger, for example. People that knew him say he sounds just like his famous character Holden Caulfield from The Catcher in the Rye. But I think in my case, for whatever reason, my writing personality, my writing voice is very, very different from my actual voice for whatever reason. So that's one of the things I've learned about me.
Now, where can off-the-shelf listeners get a copy of the George Stories and the Boys and Girls of America?
Yeah, so it's available on Amazon, Barnes & Noble. If people visit my website, authorchristophergould.com, they can get a signed copy because those come directly from me. So if people are interested in that, I'd be happy to do that. So that's probably the best way.
Okay. And do you have any upcoming speaking engagements? And if so, if you could share a few of those with our listeners.
Yeah, I have several local ones lined up. I don't have any dates yet. That hasn't been shared with me yet, but I hope to make some appearances locally. Again, I live in the Syracuse, New York area in the suburbs, but I've done some local events, and I hope to do some relatively soon once things get ironed out.
And lastly, where can we find you on social media if you're on social media?
Yeah, so I have a Twitter feed as well as an Instagram. It's C Gould. I believe it's C Gould 72. I'm pretty easy to find on there. I'm probably most active on Facebook. I have an author page, Christopher Gould. So that's probably the best way to get a hold of me.
Okay. I've so enjoyed interviewing you. I
appreciate it. It's been great.
We've had the pleasure of interviewing Christopher Gould, and he's the author of the George Stories, which very unique concept, taking short stories, putting them together into book form, and then also the author of The Boys and Girls of America, and he's just starting on another book. He said he's only finished the first chapter, but the George Stories was nominated for the Central New York Book of the Year Award. And I encourage you to visit Christopher Gould online at author Christopher Gould. His last name is spelled Gould. AuthorChristopherGould.com. Thank you so much, Christopher, for being here with us on Off the Shelf this morning. What a treat. And your book sounds just absolutely wonderful. To our listeners, thank you for being here with us this Saturday. Please just mark your calendar. You're going to catch Off the Shelf books every Saturday morning, 11 a.m. Eastern Standard Time or New York City time. We have listeners who tune in from all over the world. And as I always tell you, remember, you are amazing. You are absolutely incredible. Go out and create a fabulous day for yourself today. Christopher, I'll email you a link when the show finishes streaming. Thank you so much. Bye for now.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure. Thank you so much.